Let me ask you, how did you feel when you first learned that your dad was cooperating? You know, knowing you grew up in the life, knowing the stature your dad had, knowing the relationship you had with other people in that life and their kids, how did you feel about it? Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well and everything is great on this end. And as always, I give God all the praise, honor, and glory for that, because if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be here. So thank you, Lord, for everything that you do in my life and my family's life. And today I have a sit down with someone I'm excited to sit down with because, again, I always have a lot of men on whenever we do interviews. My audience is probably 93% male, which is understandable. That's the mob stuff. But it's great to get a woman's point of view on that life. And I'm going to be sitting down now with Karen Gravano. Everybody knows who her dad was. Everybody knows the relationship between me and her dad and so on and so forth. But, you know, we have a similar story up to a point in so many ways. We grew up with notorious dads. We had to cope with a lot. You know, I had 4 sisters that had to cope with all the stuff that went on with my dad, my mom, and my home. I also had 2 brothers. And sometimes we don't realize what a strain this is on the family, on the kids, on the relationships. It's why I always say the mob life is an evil life because of how it affects and impacts a family. And Karen Gravano, I have a lot of respect for her. I saw an interview that she's done. I got to know her a little bit just from interviews and things that I've read about her. And we're going to explore her perspective growing up with a notorious dad, Sammy the Bull Gravano. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. And any young woman that you have that you know, I would advise that they tune into this interview and listen to her because she has a lot of wonderful things to say, a lot of important things to say. And I think she is a positive influence on young girls, especially if they're going through issues in their lives. So, Karen Gravano, here we go. Really excited to talk to you, and I'll tell you why. Ever since I saw your interview on ABC, you know, they did that show on your dad, and you just came across so well. I mean, just so honest, so forthright. My wife and I were watching it, and we said, wow. We both have kind of similar stories up to a point where we grew up with, you know, notorious dads, and we grew up in that household. And I have, you know, 4 sisters, and I know how they reacted. And honestly, it wasn't quite well. They didn't do well. I mean, I had one sister, you know, she died of an overdose of drugs. She turned to drugs with all the craziness in my household. My other one was never, my younger one too, was never emotionally stable. And she died young also. And my 2 older sisters that were different mom, same father, different mom, they kind of just didn't want to deal with it. And they went to live with their mother, and that was the end of that. I never really got a woman's perspective outside of my home. And so I was very enthused to talk to you about that. And look, we can go into a lot of things. I give you a lot of credit. I mean, you turned a difficult situation that many people can't cope in and survive well in, and you turned it into a successful story for yourself. You're doing well. You've done a lot of things, you know, that are pretty out in the open. We don't have to go into everything. But I will tell you this, though. I'm going to be honest with you. I wasn't crazy about Mob Wives.
I know a lot of people weren't crazy about that show. You know, when I first started the show, the whole idea was pitched to me about women who overcome adversity. Yeah, I was very leery about being on the show in the first place because I just thought my story had way too much baggage to be on reality TV. And I kind of knew going into it that I would be the one to take the brunt of everything. But it was more or less pitched, you know, women, they come together, you have history with all these girls and you overcame it. And, you know, the first episode, I think I flew to New York and I realized I was the outcast and that was how the storyline was going to go. I got mad, you know, and it caused me to want to fight. Like, not they were attacking me, I'm fighting back. And then, you know, the first 2 seasons were actually really hard for me. I just felt like this isn't what I signed up for. Mob wives don't fight. Like, I never seen women in my kind of lifestyle, like my mother or my aunts or people fist fighting each other and throwing tables over. But when you're caught in the moment and you're the one that's being attacked all the time, that's what it is. Like I have, I guess, a little bit of my father's temper. So when people poke the bear, it's like, I'm going to react. And it took me until about season 3 and 4 to realize that this isn't about what I thought it was. It's, you know, reality TV in itself is a whole different beast, and people just feed into drama. So, you know, we kind of gave them what they want. The show was a huge success. It was in, I don't know, 25 different countries, and it was my springboard to go other places. The good thing is I kind of went through the war zone and came out. I got an executive producer deal at Viacom, and I've been working on a couple of shows. So I had to go through that whole war zone to come out on top, I guess, is how I look at it.
I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad it worked out so well. And I'm really happy about what you said, because when people ask me about the show, I said, listen, you know, reality TV producers, they want controversy, they want conflict, and even the participants, they're not going to realize that they're going to be pushed to do that. And I know, because we almost did a reality show within my family, and when we did the pilot, they had my daughters fighting with each other. I mean, yeah. And my wife said, no, we're not doing this. This is not what we signed up for, and we didn't go forward with it. But I love what you just said, in that growing up, we never saw our you know, mothers fighting with one another, or, you know, the wives of people in that life fighting with one another. And that's what I told people. I said, that's staged. That's not the way it really is. And I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I don't want to say it was staged, because it was definitely, when everybody from the outside world feed in on it and it started taking a turn, it was like we really just didn't like each other. And it took that direction, as opposed to what I had to go through in my life and I had to overcome. And I just want to say one thing really quick. They actually did interview Nina Castellano for the show, and they had her in the green screen room, and they were just like, how do you feel about Karen? And Nina and I were very close, even after the Castellano hit. People don't understand it, but I always give my props to the you know, the Castellano and, you know, the Gambino family. They are very classy. They carried themselves very classy. And, you know, she wouldn't say one bad thing about me. So obviously she didn't get casted on the show. But, you know, we went to school, and she said, that's not my business. You know, Karen and I always grew up close. We had a friendship. We had our own relationship. And like I said, I guess the producers didn't feel that would be a good enough storyline. So she didn't make the show, which I thought if she would have kind of been unique and really show what the culture that we grew up in, it would have had a whole different feel, because we were kids. You know, we were a part of something that was bigger than us. And, you know, Nina and I went to school. We went to Staten Island Academy together. We had a really good friendship. It was definitely a little awkward when the Castellano hit happens, because of, you know, my father being in the newspaper and John, but she never came to school and talked about it. It wasn't something where she said, I can't be friends with you. The men in our lifestyle growing up in that generation of the mob kept their business to the men. It really didn't spill over into the household where, you know, like I said, women and children are fighting each other.
Well, you know what? That's so right. I'm so happy to hear this, because this is reality. You know, I've said the same thing. Everything I knew about my father's life, I knew from observation, I knew from the media, I knew from other people, never from him. He never brought it into the house. He never talked about it. They didn't sit down. It wasn't dinner table discussion. You know, unfortunately, our dads were pretty notorious, and we saw a lot and we heard a lot, but it didn't come directly from them. There was that kind of respect in the household. And I'm glad you saw that too. And I kind of see, you know, I didn't know him back then, but I see Sammy, you know, behaving the same way with his family. So it's good to hear. Let me ask you, knowing that though, and how did you deal with it? Just what did you do? I mean, did you just say, hey, that's my dad, I love him? Because I always say this, kids want to love their parents. You got to give kids a real reason for them not to love you. And I love my father no matter what. I don't care what he was doing. He was a great father, good husband to my mother, supportive of me. I loved him. I wasn't interested in the other stuff. And, you know, I'd love to know how you feel about that.
You know, I always say my father was my provider. He was my protector. And to this day, he is the one that if I need to figure something out, I'm going to go to him. You know, we had a great relationship growing up. He was just normal to me. Like, he always joked around. I mean, everybody that came in my house, my friends, they felt comfortable Like I said, it was never outside business brought into the house. Yes, I've seen things, but my father had a way of making me feel like everything's going to be okay. Even if I was to question something, like there was a time when I was a kid where there was a murder outside his nightclub, and I had heard little things around the house, him speaking to my uncle. I knew that he was upset with the person that was going to purchase it. And then the guy winds up dead. For a minute, I was like, wait a minute. But then he's just acting normal. And, as a kid, you're thinking like if someone would commit a murder, it would be, you're thinking they're going to be frantic. It's going to be this whole thing. And, he just didn't skip a beat. It was, life didn't change. Everything just went according to plan. So I never questioned it. When I got older, I think when it came time for the Castellano hit, I realized that my father was definitely involved in that. But I also, as a person, I felt looking in like everyone else from the outside. It's like, I don't know why. And everybody asked me this question, and maybe you can answer it. I never questioned, people said, didn't you want to ask him? And I'm like, no, it just wasn't something that ever crossed my mind. I never wanted to sit down with him and ask him, like, did you do that? Or I don't know. It was never told to me, like, don't ever ask these questions. It was just something that was almost brought up the way we were brought up. Like my friends' fathers were involved, my uncles were involved. So I had my own little community that were like me. I went to school, the kids were different at school, but I never felt different because I grew up around, so many people that had relatives in that lifestyle.
No, I totally get that, because I remember one time I had a run-in with a detective, and I forget the exact words, but he looked at me and he says, "Why do you respect your father? Do you know that he's killed over 30 people?" And that just got me mad. I didn't care. And I never went to my dad and I never said, "Hey, did you ever kill 30 people? This is what this guy told me." The only time I ever questioned my father about anything, and I was older, I was 20 years old, or 19, I said, "Dad," because he was indicted and convicted of masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. And the witnesses against him were all drug addicts, every one of them, because I went to the trial and they all admitted it. And I said, "Dad, bank robbery with drug addicts." I said, "Would you do something like that?" Because my dad, from the time I was a kid, preached against drugs. He hated drugs. Yeah, he would make up stories about people that got killed with drugs. He would make them up, just to scare me, which was very effective because I never took a drug. But I would never ask him until that one time. It's like I didn't want to know, or it almost didn't matter. I don't know if that's good or bad, I really don't. So, I understand what you're saying. You just don't want to know. You don't want to ask. You don't care in a way.
Right. No, that's what it is. As like you said earlier, your parents are, kids don't disrespect their parents or don't not love their parents until they're given a reason. And I was never given that reason at all. I had a beautiful childhood.
Well, you know what? In many respects, mine was interrupted a lot because my dad got in trouble when I was very young, and he kept going to trial, going to jail, in and out, and all that kind of stuff. But I did see one thing. It had a tremendous impact. My brothers and sisters couldn't cope, and my mother and my father, their relationship really got strained as the years went on, and he did all that time in prison. So, I say this. I want to know how you feel about it. I've always said this: the mob life, mafia, Cosa Nostra, what we call it in this country, it's an evil lifestyle. And I say that, I don't call the guys evil. I was one of them. I'm just very fortunate to be where I am. But I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been in some ways devastated or really negatively impacted in a large way. And any lifestyle that does that to a family is just a bad lifestyle. And how do you feel about that? Growing up in it, seeing the impact.
I definitely feel like there were perks and a good side to that lifestyle, but there's also very negative things. And that's why even when I came out with Mob Wives and, other families like the Castellanos or the Gottis, I feel like we're kind of bonded for life because we all were affected by a certain lifestyle. And that's to say, of course, a lot of them don't like me. They didn't like the fact that I came out on TV. They don't like the fact that, there is some truths that they don't want spoken that I will speak upon. But the reality is we've all been through something, and they love their fathers just like I love my fathers. And these families were torn apart. The reality is a lot of people like to call themselves victims. And, I think a victim mentality won't get you far in life. So it's like you have to pick up the pieces and see how to overcome it. And that is confronting things and admitting to things. Like, a lot of times, even with the Gottis, let's just say, and I don't, to bring them up, when Mob Wives came out, they would always attack me and take shots at me. And I would just laugh. I would just sit back and be like, I feel like no matter what, we've all been through something. So why not just come together and put it on the table? Like, there's really, like you said, not a lot of good that's going to come out of this unless we all join forces and say, listen, we were all affected in one way. All stories ended up differently, but the reality is, we had the same path, and it's like how you overcome that. So, I agree with you. It's definitely evil, but you got to be able to accept it and change it.
Well, I agree, and I don't see why anybody would harm. Well, I guess I could. I mean, with the Gottis. Well, let me ask you, how did you feel about John? I have to ask you this because viewers are going to say, why didn't you ask her? How did you feel about John Gotti?
Okay, so he was definitely a larger than life character. He would walk in a room and commands attention. He carried himself. He kind of just wreaked power when he would walk in. So especially when my father cooperated, like, I couldn't understand it. I was like, it took me a long time. Now, because of not just what my father has told me, because of things that I had to see in my life, knowing what Cosa Nostra is supposed to be, he destroyed that lifestyle. He'd walk in a room like who he was, but the reality is no one's supposed to know who you are. And that kind of behavior and that kind of put it in the face, he, in my opinion, destroyed more families than my father, or, when it came to bringing down the mob and drawing heat. Like, he was the poster child for organized crime. He was the reason why I believe the government went after Cosa Nostra in the way that they did, because John Gotti had a put it in your face type of attitude, which now, knowing what I know, when my father cooperated, I was 19 years old. I didn't understand Cosa Nostra. Now, knowing what I know, and this is what's unique about me. A lot of people, I wasn't a gangster. I grew up very shielded, surrounded by that life, but protected in my own household. But after my father cooperated, I had to learn a lot on my own, who to trust, who not to trust. Why did this happen? I had to kind of like do my own investigating, and then also, come encounter with some of the people that were in my father's lifestyle and try to understand, how I could proceed, how I can move forward. Because, I didn't go, my brother, my mother, and myself, we didn't leave into the witness protection program for years. Like, we never went in the witness protection program. Let me clarify that. But we stayed in Staten Island. And like I said, there was a hit put out on my brother. And these were people who we considered uncles. So it was...
A hit on Gerard?
Yeah, there was a hit put out on Gerard. So he was 15 years old. Actually, Joe Watts, I believe. I don't know if my father ever spoke about it, but he was the one. And it went to someone that was... I think it went to Joey Bellotti, had heard about it, because the kids that were supposed to lure Gerard to a nightclub, because they were going to kill him to send a message to my father, they wound up telling someone, and it wound up getting back to Joey Bellotti. And Joey Bellotti went to the kids and said, if one hair on that kid's head is touched, it'll be a huge problem. And it got called off. And then later the FBI had found out, and they're the ones that came and told my brother, I told my father, you got to get these kids out of here. You got to get your wife and kids out of New York. And I actually refused to go. My opinion was like, well, if they're going to kill me, then they could kill me. I'm not going. I don't condone what you did. That's not my lifestyle, and listen, I had to make my own mistakes. I acted out because, like you said, your sisters and people had difficulty coping with it. I did at a point. I acted out. I, rebelled. I sold drugs. I dated bad boys. And the reality is we wound up getting in trouble. And I had to sit back and analyze my life and my decisions and how I got from being a good girl owning a business to now I'm being indicted for drug charges. Like, how did this all play out? And I had to understand that in my mind to be able to move forward.
By the way, I love you, brother. Gerard and I get along really well, and we've had some, intimate conversations outside of your dad. All good, but I really like him a lot. He's a good young man, and I'm really sorry to hear that, man. We had a code that I thought was very well respected up until that point. You never bothered anybody's families or anything else, because when I walked away and people were calling me every kind of name, and you're a rat and you're this and that, you know, my son was in New York, my oldest boy, and I never worried about him because people said, well, wow, you know, your son is there. You think anybody's going to retaliate? And I said, no, for what? Nobody's going to do that. We never did anything like that, ever. So
Right.
it's sad to hear something like that, but you know, fortunately, didn't go the distance. But
Yeah. I mean, even someone like Joe Watts, someone that never really followed the codes, because it was revealed later that he was a cooperating witness, undercover informant. There's difference from a cooperating witness than an undercover CI, and he was supposedly working with the government for years. So I guess codes didn't apply to him.
yeah, what's the difference? I mean,
Yeah.
undercover informant, cooperating, it's the same thing.
Well, it's actually worse if you're undercover. I think if you're going to walk away from the life and just let it be known, then that's one thing. But if you're going to actually go undercover and lie to your best friends and be working with the government, to me, that's the lowest form of a human that could possibly be.
Well, I could agree with that. You know, when Greg Scarpa, when we found out for 20 years that he was working undercover, a lot of guys were nervous, including myself, because he was a guy I sat down with I don't know how many times. Let me ask you, how did you feel when you first learned that your dad was cooperating? You know, knowing you grew up in the life, knowing the stature your dad had, knowing the relationship you had with other people in that life and their kids, how did you feel about it?
Betrayed. I felt like my father, betrayed me. He taught me my whole life that that's something that you never do. It was like my brother and I would get in trouble for telling on each other. He would get in trouble for doing whatever I was telling on him for, and I would get in trouble for telling. So that was something that I honestly couldn't even fathom. Like knowing my father and just being around him and knowing, he was up against cases before and that's not even a route that he chose. I was definitely upset. I couldn't wrap my brain around it. It was honestly the worst thing, pretty much still to this day, that I think that ever happened, especially between him and I. I was actually in one of the earlier conversations at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan when he told me. I just was like, I don't care. There's no way I'm on board with this. And I walked out of the room. And I later found out, especially through that ABC special from George Gabriel, I think was one of the agents that talked about it, that the deal almost didn't happen because of me. So really? If I would have known that then, I would have pushed harder, but it is what it is. Reality is everything happens for a reason. And I do understand a lot more of what I didn't understand then.
Well, was the relationship strained for a while as a result of that?
Oh yeah, it was a couple of years. That's when I just went on my, I'm going to clubs. I dated bad boys. I had a weed service in Manhattan. I almost felt like my whole life was ripped out from underneath me. And the people that were closest to me turned on me. Here I was, prior to my father cooperating, let her come over. Let's go on vacations. My birthdays, I'm getting diamond earrings and, exotic jewelry. And then my father cooperates and I'm not even welcome in the house. They're told they can't hang out with me. They can't be around me. They're sneaking. I had a lot of resentment too, just because of all that happening. Then after, especially when I heard about my brother and that situation, it just really turned me off. My father cooperated, but it turned me off about the people around me. Like even I didn't cooperate. I wasn't part of that lifestyle. You people, and I say you people is my father's crew, and everyone treated me like I was family, like you loved me. Like there was nothing that could ever happen to me with you guys around. And then all of a sudden it's like I'm thrown to the wolves, and all because of what he did. That's what got me to start to think like this lifestyle's brought up on loyalty and respect and honor. But what did I do to ever disrespect someone? So all that love was fake because my father was the underboss. Made me start to question, made me want to know more, made me want to know why. Like I said, it outside of my own investigations. And my father, my uncle, was actually on board and was the one that told my father he should cooperate. And, after my father cooperated, I was told I could never speak about it again, and acted like that conversation where I was part of in the MCC, it never happened. Of course, it wasn't my place to go tell other people around them. And when I did speak to my father about it, he said, don't say a word, that he'll handle it later. But it just kind of started to show me betrayal and understand that, people aren't who they say they are.
I can certainly relate to that also. With me, it's a little bit different because later on in life, my dad gets violated on his parole 5 times, which means that my family's falling apart. My dad has basically 5 opportunities to be at home and take care of the family because we needed him. And each time You know, I would tell him too. I said, Dad, you got to get out of New York. I said, the family's falling apart. You can't keep meeting with people. And 5 times, in my view, he put that life in front of his family to great destruction. And so now I see things that say, oh, your father was a man's man. He made it till the end. He did that. He died with his boots on, which I have a respect for. Don't get me wrong, Karen. I respect that. But in the same token, you had an opportunity to save your family, and your family was destroyed as a result of what you did. It was the first time I really had a confrontation with him, and I resented that. It's not that I would have wanted him to cooperate, but he had a different path. He could have left New York, taken care of his family with him, stay away from everybody, and not go back to jail. And he chose not to. So I don't know. So it goes both ways. I mean, I think we look at our dads differently. But let me ask you this. How did you, I know you love your dad. I know you wanted to repair that relationship. I know how difficult it is. Mine was difficult after I left the life, and my dad was upset with me, and you betrayed your oath and all of that. But we built it back as far as we could. There was always a little something there that it was never quite the same, but I know he loved me and I loved him. How did you work on building that relationship? Because I know your father loves you. He and I spoke about it. He loves his kids. No doubt about it. No doubt about that.
Yes, I'm the one that's questionable. He always says I'm the one that's like him. Him and Gerard get along fine, but I'm the one that's going to talk back. And I'm the one that's definitely going to voice my opinion. When I got to Arizona, after he came out of prison the first time, we started rebuilding our relationship. And like the first thing I wanted to know was why? Like, why did you cooperate? And I had to go through all these conversations with him, there were numerous ones. And I just realized that he's exactly the man that I've known my whole life. He's my father, right? And his views on Cosa Nostra is his views. They're his lifestyle. I understand now, why he cooperated. I hate to say this like this because everyone's like, oh my God, but in that world, maybe he should have killed John in jail and we would have had a different outcome, but that wouldn't have been better for his family and the people around him. So I'm glad he didn't take that route, just because it's just never good when it comes to murder, right? So what I had to go through is better because at least I still have a relationship with him and we had the ability to mend. It was iffy. Like I said, when I first got to Arizona, I was he put a book out. His book had come out, and remember when I'm coming from New York, everybody kind of turned against me. We land in Arizona and there's all these people like, oh my God, can we get an autograph from your father? Can they sign this book? And Gerard and I kind of let our guard down and let the wrong people around us. And of course, there were kids selling drugs and, do you know anyone in New York? And it kind of made me almost feel accepted again being bad, right? Because I felt like if everyone turned against my father because he cooperated, if I'm bad, these people will like me, they won't want me not around. And started getting involved in the whole ecstasy thing. And there was a point where my brother was going to go to New York and buy drugs from a kid that was trying to become a made member of with the Bonanno family. And I knew that. And I kind of felt like maybe they were going to set Gerard up or do something. And that's when I told my father. And that's how my father got involved with the whole ecstasy. It's a long, drawn out story. I could sit here for hours and tell you about it. But he wound up coming in to kind of like guide the situation or maneuver it. And it all backfired. We wound up going to prison and he was angry. He was very angry. He was like, you guys just didn't want to listen. We had an opportunity. We can change our whole life. And I think that was the first time I actually felt like I had a voice because I was like, well, you don't get it. It's everything that you put us through that made us do that. And it's like, if you weren't Sammy the Bull, this wouldn't have happened the way it happened. So you have to take responsibility for what you've done prior, and we'll take responsibility for kind of screwing up here. But the reality is like, we've always stuck by you. Even being mad, I've never turned my back on you. And, if you're going to turn your back on us because of this, he's like, I would never turn my back on you. And it's just, we just realized we're not the perfect family. We've made a lot of mistakes, every single one of us. But the reality is, we're still family and we will always have each other's back. We, like I said, when something's wrong, we'll be there to protect each other. We try to provide for each other, help each other out. My father's stubborn. I know that you know that a lot.
Okay.
He could be very strong-willed, and I have a lot of those tendencies. So him and I butt heads, but he is still someone that I know, like, he will always be there for me through whatever. So I will always be there for him.
Well, you know what? That's powerful. You know, it's funny because I have I have 5 daughters, and actually 4 of my daughters are really, well, no, let me correct that, because one of them wasn't, but now she is very outspoken, very independent, tell you like
Mhm.
it is, the same way that you are, you know. And I'm glad to hear that you told your father that you're that independent,
Yeah.
spoken. But it's also good to know, and I saw that in him, that you know, he basically took the rap and took the heat for his family.
Oh
And
yeah, in that instance, definitely.
yeah, I mean,
You know.
that's a 20-year bid. I mean, that's a big hit that he took.
Yeah.
But I would expect that of him. Any conversation I had with him about his family has always been great and how much he loves them. And until you walk in somebody's shoes, a lot of people can talk about a lot of things, but until you've walked in those shoes, you don't know the whole situation. Yeah, he's doing his best, I think, to really turn his life around. What he told you, what, 20 years ago? I think he really meant it, and he's doing it now.
Yeah.
You know, so,
Yeah.
and I know you must be proud of that. You got to feel good about it.
No, I am. I definitely, you know, my father's, like I said, you never know what's coming out of his mouth. He's an interesting character, but he's funny. And one thing everyone always says is he has a way of telling a story that makes you like, I probably think right now, like I've done the Castellano hit because it's the way he tells the story. I feel like I was in the car, and he has a way, and he just has so much knowledge of things that happen. And you know, he's, like I said, he's that person, but he's also my father. So when the cameras go off and we come back to real life, you know, we just have a regular relationship.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, he is a great storyteller. There's no doubt about
Hmm.
that. And I've sat with him a few times, but he goes on, and he makes it long, but you're interested. He's good. That's why
Yes.
he's so well on YouTube. You know, people are
Mm.
just into it. But you know, this is it's really gratifying to me, you know, and hopefully people that are watching this, because they've heard a lot of this same stuff from me, but hearing it from a woman, you know, hearing it from somebody that went through so much and has been able to come out of this and survive, it's really important stuff, because you know every family goes through something. Ours is a little unique. It's a little bit more dramatic, obviously, and you know, it's a genre that people are really tuned into and interested in. But every family has their travails, and you know, kids want to love their parents. I say that all the time, regardless of what they might have done. If you're at least a good parent to that child, you want to love them, and that's it. You
Yeah.
dismiss a lot of stuff that went on in their other life.
So through my walk of life here, you know, I always thought like because of the situations that I had this struggle, and then I came across people who didn't even have relationships with their parents. And you know, I met girls who didn't even have a father. And that's one thing I can say, that having my father and his presence in my life definitely made me who I am. He gave me my work ethic. I mean, for my graduation present, I got a florist right next to his office, and it was like, here's the key. You're going to be here, the first person to open the door every day. And of course, it drove me crazy when I was 19 years old, but it still sticks with me till today. And that's something that him being such a strong influence in my life, he gave me a lot of like the ground for, you know, what I want to do and how I want to even raise my daughter. My daughter is very business savvy. I call her, you know, she does like merchant cash advance, and she lends businesses money. So I call her my little legal loan shark. But she has that drive and that hustle. So outside of all the things that, you know, I experienced in my life, I had a great foundation. And for that, I'll ever, you know, that's why I'll forever be grateful to my mother and my father. My mother, I always thought my father was the strongest one until we had to go through everything. She's the
Sure.
gangster. She's the strong one. She's the glue that held everything together.
Knowing the inside story of not only yourself, my family, who I had a tough mother, my wife, when I was away, she was very independent. I give her all the credit for raising the kids and holding the family together through all my nonsense that I went through and caused her and them, you know, and that's true. The women don't get any credit. They don't look for it, but they're really the backbone of the family. Yes, I want to ask you a little bit about Karina in a minute, but I want to ask you this. My daughters, I would never want them to bring home a mob guy and get into a relationship with them, because I know what it's going to cause them throughout their life, no doubt about it. But you know, my daughters seem to hold all their boyfriends up to my standard, because I
Mm-hmm.
treat them right, you know, and I do my best to be a good husband. But they also say, you know what, we like a little bit bad boy. My one daughter
Yeah.
says he's got to have at least a misdemeanor if I'm going to date him, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So How do you feel about that? Without getting into, your personal relationships, would you ever really want to be involved or be married or have a family with another guy that's involved in the life like your dad and I were?
No, I mean, I would love the white picket fence and, but because of who my father is, it's hard to kind of date. Like, I think people get nervous when I was younger, especially when everything was going on in the newspaper, I'm sure a lot of people said, don't bring that girl home. It's it's big shoes to fill, I guess, in a sense, but I do have an attraction to bad boys. But I don't, I now that I'm older, as I matured, I just want peace. And I especially don't want that for my daughter. I don't want her to be waiting on a visiting line or raising a child by herself, a single parent. I want her to be able to just be comfortable. And like I said, when a person goes to jail, it's not only the time that they're doing, it's just the repercussions on the family. They kind of rip through everything. So no, I would love to have the white picket fence. I might have missed that boat, but I want the best for my daughter.
Well, that's great. I want to ask you this, as long as you brought that up. My mother, she coped with this fairly well for a long time. She fought for my dad's freedom. She visited him all the time, but she had to deal with what was going on in the household. When my dad was away, during that time, we were allowed 1 3-minute phone call a month and 1 visit a month. And so he was not part of the family, basically, when you're dealing with everyday life. And as things progressed, though, at the end of her life, she died in 2012. The last 4 or 5, 6 years of her relationship with my dad can only be described as ugly. It finally got to her, and she blamed him for everything that went wrong, and rightfully so. I mean, who else can blame? How did your mom cope with all of this?
My mother, honestly, I don't know. I still ask her, I'm like, do you need therapy? You want to talk? She laughs. But she always says, your father was definitely a good father and he was a great husband. I think a lot of this has taken a toll, but she holds it all together because now she has grandkids and we kind of just look at the bright side of things. It's a lot, my mother, like I'll ask her, did you watch the YouTube? Or, she don't want no parts of it. She's more of a mom and a grandma. I mean, like I said, I guess there are things that have affected her, but she just holds it together for the most part for her family.
I really respect that. My wife, the same thing. She doesn't look at my documentaries. She don't want to know anything. She said, I lived through enough. I don't need to know anything. She wants to be a good mom, a good wife. And you got to respect the women for that. So many of these women have gone through so much heartache because of what we did. And when women come out and when you can talk about your mom like that, it's so admirable. I really mean that. Let me ask you this, Karina, because she's the age of my youngest daughter. I think she's 23.
Yes.
Yeah, my youngest one is 24, and she's had to cope with a lot because a lot of this stuff about your dad was through her lifestyle, and I'm sure she had to be impacted at some point. She had you to protect her, but how did she deal with it?
I brought Karina to New York, and she was 14 years old. I was already doing the show Mob Wives, so she kind of knew a little bit more about the story, but I've told her things we never hid that from the kids, my nephew or my daughter, but she was definitely sheltered. Arizona is a whole different way of life. So she came to New York and now, she's surrounded by people that my father, was friends with their grandfathers, or, she goes to places and those type of people are at the restaurant, and New York kind of teaches you a whole different hustle and a whole different vibe. She gets it. And like I tell her, our history is our history, and you could either make that break you or it can make you stronger. You always walk in a room with your head held high, and you are not your grandfather. You didn't do those things. You're a beautiful, intelligent young woman. Always carry yourself. And if people are going to talk about you, then they're not worth being your friends or being around you. She does well. She's in a business that is a man's world. It has that little bit of a sharky kind of, you got to move fast or you'll get eaten up alive. And she does well. I don't know how. I mean, she just kind of came here and just took to the whole life. One thing about my father, and I always say this, he always gave it to me like it was. It was like, this is what it is. He said things to me like your best friend would say to you. And it's like, I never really hid things from my parents. And that's the way Karina and I are. So we have a very unique bond. And I think that that's what makes her such a strong girl. She's very independent and she holds her head high. I mean, in the beginning, she's She's like, especially even when the show came on, she's like, if one more person puts a rat emoji under my picture, I'm gonna faint. You know, people, but we laugh about it because, like I always said, all those people I used to let people's opinions affect me. And when I let it affect me, that's when I made mistakes, or that's when I did bad things that was really out of my character because I was trying to impress other people. And that's the lesson, you know. Every time someone beat me down or told me I couldn't do something or I wasn't welcome, just made me stronger and made me more confident in myself. And Karina kind of has that same persona.
Well, that's great. And as you know, in this day and age, especially with social media, if you're going to be out there, if you don't have thick skin, you're not making it. You've got to have thick skin. Because people are always taking shots at you all the time.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you this. My daughter, well, I'm in probably the same situation. It came out that there was a contract on my life when I walked away, and the feds came in. They told my wife that, and that my father had gone along with it because I was betraying my oath. And my youngest daughter was never able to get over that. When she heard that, my father could have possibly hurt me in some way, she wasn't impolite to my dad. She didn't get nasty or arrogant with him, but she could never get close to him in any way. Mm-hmm. And I felt bad about that because I told her, listen, you don't understand street stuff. My dad would never have done anything like that. It's not, he did what he had to do for whatever purpose he had, but that's not true. And don't listen to the FBI. That's what I told her. But I'm curious, how does Karina get along with your dad? I mean, is it a good relationship?
Yeah, she is here primarily in New York. So they have a good relationship. Like, they call each other. She doesn't see him as often as I would like them to see each other. But yes, they have a very good relationship. And then, it's always like, Karina, why did you post that picture? Your grandfather's on Instagram. She's like, whose grandfather follows them on Instagram? So it's like, that kind of stuff. But they have a good relationship.
What does she think of all the stuff she sees about him and him on YouTube and some of the things that he's doing? Does she like it? Is she amused by it? What does she think?
Karina, like, the whole mob thing to her is like, I did a show called Families of the Mafia. And she was like, why? Why do we have to do this show? Why does it always have to be about the mafia? And I agree, because we have so much more going on, but, the mob sells. Like, it's just, that's the hook. And she, like I said, she could do without it, but it is what it is.
And you're right. I mean, that's the platform. And look, that's the genre that worked for me to at least get things started. And as we're talking about, tell us what else you got in mind, what else you're doing. I know you're always doing something. And I know that I think the Families of the Mafia show is pretty successful from what I'm hearing. It's done well.
Yes, it did. We did 2 seasons. We got offered another season, but we didn't jump on it because, for me personally, it's called Families of the Mafia, right? I don't do mafia stuff anymore. I do, neither does my daughter. So It's like, how do we keep up with that name? And it's like, if you guys are going to look in the wrong, like everything, like, let's just say even my daughter, she works in finance, a lawsuit came out and they want to, follow that storyline instead of the positive things. I just rather not go down that lane anymore. I thank the network for giving me that platform. I still have a deal with them, a production deal. I'm working on consulting on a couple of movies with them. And, we'll see. I think, there'll definitely be some other things in the works as far as TV. I'm working back in skincare. I have a spa in Marlborough, New Jersey. So I'm back to doing facials. I'm working with my daughter, doing some finance, some investments. So just always keeping, different avenues of income in there. But, TV, definitely, we're gonna definitely keep working. I actually have a meeting with the network next week, and hopefully we can get some more things on air.
Well, that's great. Yeah. I wish you luck on that. And I also read or heard that you get involved with a lot of charitable causes. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, you're pretty into that. And I think one was about urology or something, if I remember.
Yes, I worked with that. Mm-hmm. I worked with that. Right now, I've been helping a lot of, it's called the Decarceration Collective, which is helping people overturn drug sentences. So I've been working with that organization, trying to help a dear friend of mine overcome a life sentence for drugs. So I've been really kind of focusing a lot on that. There's a whole thing that we can get into on that, but just for people that got sentenced to life for drugs is just, the law right now is changing and so many people are coming home and it's still discretionable among some judges. So there's a lot of things that are in motion to kind of help. And I've been working on that and, just working basically.
Well, I totally support that. We need prison reform without a doubt. So anyone that can contribute to that, I certainly support that. As a matter of fact, if I can ever get involved in any way to help, and I really mean that, because what's going on in this system today is driving me crazy. I will ask you this, just politically for 1 minute. People ask, when you grew up in the mob, were you guys, Republican or Democrat? And I said, we were all Democrats. And they said, why? I said, well, we found Democrats were easier to corrupt back then, and you know what?
Yeah.
The way I see it right now, it's pretty much the same, the way this country is going. And I don't want to get into all the politics and all of that, but just your views on that. You think we're really going in the wrong direction? How serious do you think it is? Because I'll tell you what, you have a child. I'm really worried about my kids and grandchildren growing up in the America that is so foreign to what we grew up in.
Yeah, it's honestly almost unbelievable that I never thought that we would see the world the way it is. And the sad part is that people are so scared to even express their political views. I was never into politics, especially growing up in this world. I was always like, what does it matter? I always had that look on it until now. And for me, it's like, I respect everybody's political opinion. It's just that we should be able to talk about it. And the problem is, I feel like the country, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we're just so torn apart. It's like people want to fight over anything. You say the wrong thing and it's like, you could be banned or you could be exiled. Or you could be in a fist fight. It's just, even for having an opinion on a vaccine or, whatever. It's just sad that everybody's just in this state right now. And I truly wish that people can come together because there are so many things that do need to be addressed. I think that we have a drug epidemic in this world right now that's going on and the borders are open. And it's just really sad because they don't really talk about fentanyl has been the number one, cause of death in this country. We have prison reform that needs to be addressed, which is just sad because it's kind of like in this weird space where people are coming home. They've made so many, steps forward and then it comes to a halt. So, even in the prison reform thing, if you say like Trump signed this in, it's like you can go to war for just even saying that. But Trump did sign in a lot of things. It's just in the state of it, the way everything is now, even if you were to say like Trump, he signed a great law into play, which is, compassionate release. And so many people are getting released off of compassionate release, which he did a great thing. Yes, there were other organizations, the Obama organization that started the 2-point reduction and it was moving forward. But Trump signed the thing in for compassionate release, which is really bringing people home that would have never seen the light of day. And it's unfortunate that you can't all come together and talk about it because if you say like Trump did a good thing, then people want to be like, you're a Trump supporter or you're a Biden supporter. It's just unfortunate. And I just wish that people can come together as people and have a stronger voice instead of fighting each other, because we'll never win with any politician if we're not together as people.
Well, you're right, Karen. And unfortunately, that divisiveness and that terrible rhetoric comes from the top and it trickles down to everybody at the bottom. And if we can get some people that were responsible in office and learn how to talk to one another and work these things out, we wouldn't have the divisiveness we have in this country. But I will tell you this, I have a lot of respect for what your dad is doing lately with this fentanyl issue. Unfortunately, this week, we're dealing with a tragedy that happened a year ago in our family. My daughter's boyfriend, who they would have proceeded to marriage at some point, died of an overdose. He took an Adderall, didn't realize it was laced with fentanyl, and died within a few minutes. Horrible.
I'm sorry to hear that. That is horrible.
Thank you. And it was very, very traumatic for her. It took months for her, to cope with it, not get over it,
right,
but at least coping with it. And we got to, that's the biggest epidemic we have in this country right now, and people don't get it. And your father and I grew up Democrats, and now we're both conservative. I don't want to say
right.
We're conservative in our views, and we want to deal with issues that are happening that are really serious in this country. And I respect him a lot for that. I've been watching what he's doing. So if you speak to him, I mean, I do also, but tell them, keep it up in any way I
Yeah,
can. In that
it's
fight.
important. It's important because those are things that are really not highlighted, and it's affected my family. Some of my friends' family. It just touches home to so many people, and if you don't shed light on it, it's just going to keep going and getting worse. And it's sad because some of these kids, I've heard kids that OD'd off of just smoking pot. You don't know, or they're taking what they think is an Adderall, like you said, and it's laced. Everything is laced. Every street pill right now is laced with fentanyl.
It's terrible. It's terrible. We got to fight back. We got to do something about it. And let me ask you this: two last questions. What would you want your legacy to be when you move on in life?
I think that I would just want it to be a person that fought hard for what she believed in. And, as many times as you get knocked down, you just pick yourself up. Like, you can't just let life blow you over and lay down. And I think for me, that's always been my motto. I'm not perfect. You know what I mean? I've definitely had my share of mistakes. I accept them and I overcome them, and I just come back stronger.
Well, I appreciate that. And I just want to end with this. I think there's so many young women that grow up in households that have various issues, go through a lot of trouble. And you had a real rough situation to deal with, no doubt about it. I know that personally. I know it might even be harder for a woman than it is for a guy. I saw that with my own sisters, and I see it with my daughters. And the fact that you have come out of it and you have a tremendous attitude and you still love your dad and you're doing things, you're taking care of your daughter, I think is very admirable. And I really mean that, Karen. I appreciate everything that you're doing, and, just keep fighting, keep doing well. And
thank you.
Hopefully
I appreciate you having me on.
Well,
I was actually excited for this interview. So
was
yeah.
I. And so is Mike.
Good.
So thank you very much. Well, there you have it. I thought it was a great sit down with her. Sometimes, you watch, things on television and you get impressions about people, and sometimes they're just not accurate. Sometimes they're negative and they shouldn't be. And I think that's the case. I have a lot of respect for Karen Gravano, and I like everything that she said today. It made so much sense. I relate to it. And again, any young women going through problems in their life, maybe in their families, maybe they don't have a great relationship, maybe their dad, their mom got in some kind of a situation that you're finding hard to cope with, I really think you should tune into this interview and listen to Karen Gravano. She had some wonderful things to say. I have a lot of respect for her and what she's been through and how she's come out of it. She's a fighter. She's come out of it in the right way. Still has a relationship with her dad. All great stuff. So that's it. Take a look. You're going to enjoy it very much. How do I leave you? Same way. Always the same way. It's not going to change. Be safe. Please do that. I had Jedediah on the other day. She visited New York for one day, and saw 4 crimes being committed. Ladies, be safe. Be healthy, of course. God bless every one of you.